So, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series, we talk about all things cloud with experts and advocates from right across our industry, covering huge variety of topics from skills and careers through to technical overviews and soft skills. So, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. It really does mean a lot. Do take part in the chat below. Drop us a comment, like and subscribe. It's always appreciated. Okay, so there's no slowing down with the awesome guests that are coming to join me, and today is no exception. He's an Azure advocate working at Microsoft right now. He's an awesome guy. He runs and hosts a plethora of Azure-related content and helps our awesome community to break down and understand those complex scenarios that we know we all love to learn about. So, based out of Brooklyn, New York, I'm super happy and thrilled to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With as Mr. Jay Gordon. Hey Jay, how you doing?
Hey John, that's quite a lovely setup you've got there.
Oh, we have a little go. I've been busy in the COVID lockdown. I think it's probably safe to say, Jay. It's kept me busy building this little setup up. How you
Yeah,
doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's Monday where I am, and it's the afternoon, so I am in the middle of my day. But I've got a lot to get done, and I try to constantly get more stuff done and be part of this community and get people some really great information the best way I can.
No, absolutely, Jay. And do you know what? When I reached out to you to go come and be a guest, which I'm super thankful for, obviously, if you've given up your time to come and say hello to me for half an hour or so. But you're one of these guys you're working at Microsoft. You've got arguably one of the coolest jobs in tech. This developer relations is always the fantastic people that work in those kind of roles. They're out there interfacing with community, helping everybody kind of learn in the best way that we can. So, look, I really want to delve into those areas, but I guess before we get to that, I'll always like to start off with finding a little bit of background about you, Jay. How did you kind of get into tech? What's your kind of career history, if you want to give us that
Sure.
potted path?
Yeah, I got started in technology. I suppose it was around 2000, 2001. But my first having root access on a production system probably was 1999, where I was working like in dial-up support. And then I moved on to doing what a lot of people at my time getting started. I dropped out of college, and
Yep.
when I dropped out of college, I ended up going to work for companies that needed web design. I wasn't really good at it, but it was a time where if you knew how to write some HTML, you understood some CSS, you could do
Hmm.
some JavaScript, and you understand some of the design tools like Flash at that time, and you could basically get away with having just a little bit of design skills.
Hmm.
So did that for a while, and then I decided to get into system administration because I ended up really liking the idea of understanding problems that people were having and coming up with solutions using servers, networking, and really tackling uh, the problems people run into and help them kind of achieve their goals that they're set out to do. Been through a lot of different companies over the years. Started off at a managed service provider. I got bought up by Rackspace years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
Then moved on to a couple places, went into consulting, and then eventually wound up at a few places like uh, BuzzFeed, which was a really
Okay.
cool
Yeah.
time because it was in the middle of the height of their traffic. So I got to be part of some really big high traffic events. For anybody who remembers the dress, I was on call that day. That was a lot of work, but we kept the site online. I've also worked over at DigitalOcean, making cloud because I
Okay.
wanted to
Yeah.
give that a shot. Then I went to MongoDB for a while and I
Okay.
helped them around developer advocacy when they launched their database as a service offering on the cloud, and really enjoyed that time. Got them to a point where they went public, and I was happy with what I had done there. And so I got an opportunity to do cloud advocacy at Microsoft, and I've been there now about 3.5 years. And I really enjoy the role. I feel like it's really been fulfilling for me.
No, and it shows, Jay. To be honest, I think as a consumer of a lot of your content, it's definitely one of those areas where you kind of it's where tech meets kind of simple explanations on things. We need to break down the complex into these easy to understand concepts, I guess. And yeah, I mean, you're doing a fantastic job, Jay. As are all the cloud advocacy team over there at Microsoft. It's always cool to engage. So you pulled out some really cool past jobs there, Jay. So let's pick you up. The dress. You'll have to explain the dress to me. I don't know. I think I've got an idea, but I'm not going to say it just in case I'm wrong. What was the
Yeah.
dress?
So the dress was I guess a high traffic event on BuzzFeed.com that kind of like came from a a Tumblr post that a person that I used to work with got, where someone said, "Can you tell what color this dress is? Is it, you know,
I know. Yeah. Okay.
gold or is it blue?" And people couldn't really tell. And
That's
what's
right.
funny is that the day started. It was like February 26, 2015, and the day started with llamas getting loose in maybe it was Los Angeles. And
Yeah.
once the llamas went loose, like traffic spiked up because we decided to start posting about it.
Yeah.
And then I went home. I'd spent most of the day at a data center building out a colo location for some DR. And I got home. Maybe it was around 8 p.m. Finished dinner, getting cleaned up for the evening, and spending some time. Some quality couch time was in the plans. But
Yeah.
what ended up
Yeah.
happening is my pager went off, and I looked at my phone. My wife said to me, "Is this about the dress?" And I said, "What dress are you talking about?" And
Yeah.
I went to bed that night around 3:30 in the morning,
Okay. Okay.
dealing with some what we like to call thundering herd, where
Wow. Yeah.
everybody is coming to a website all at once, and how that website withstands it. So spent a lot of time like dealing with database locks,
Yeah.
finding the best way to cache certain things, and then eventually being able to walk away and say, all right, it's online. Let's let monitoring do its job. Let's let this auto scaling that we set up do its job, and went from there.
But that's a really cool story, though, Jay. So yeah, I remember the dress now. I was thinking of a completely different dress, but I remember that incident. That was a BuzzFeed thing, was it? That originally popped up on BuzzFeed, right? Okay. So I suppose that's a really cool backstory to kind of working in cloud and tech and auto scale and the kind of things that can crop up for I guess any business website. If you're not planning, I know we're kind of breaking into tech mode at the minute, but that's a really cool story. You also mentioned DigitalOcean, so I'm guessing you kind of had a little bit of an insight before the last year of this Web 3.0. I mean, did you learn any cool things working over there?
I learned about how to deal with people really needing to fill gaps at scale for their particular solutions with technology. So a lot of it was like, how do I spin up a lot of virtual machines and have them capable of withstanding a lot of traffic, and people not having, because they didn't have load balancing services at the time, and they didn't have auto scaling services. So a lot of it was coming up with ways to build that for customers. So setting up software load balancers, setting up inbound DDoS protection for individual customers, like finding ways to kind of help them do things at scale, but for a reasonable cost. Because,
Okay.
let's be honest, cloud providers aren't inexpensive. They can
Hmm.
really rack up charges when you need things to start happening at a large scale. And so there I got to learn about how people can really maximize what they need using the resources they have in front of them. Uh, got some time after that around working with AWS.
Hmm.
I started working with AWS, I think back in like 2011. Um, and then from there, started understanding the other big clouds like GCP and Azure. And then eventually, Azure became kind of my jam,
Yeah.
especially once I came to Microsoft, because I started to learn about the benefits of using um, not just a trusted technology provider, but the company that kind of created the enterprise. I mean,
Hmm.
enterprise businesses didn't have as many technology solutions until Microsoft came around, and then they basically invented the platforms that
Yeah,
people are
sure.
running on. And so creating their own cloud platform definitely gave people some sort of confidence in being able to utilize those services and to really make them work for their businesses. So I love the cloud. I love what it's brought to people. Um, I love being able to simplify what is a vast array of services that are available,
Sure.
and being
Yeah.
able to get people to believe like I can do this, whether it's needing virtual machines for a legacy application, or saying I need to use Kubernetes to be able to build microservices. These are all
Sure.
things that, like, I think we can put into simple terms and help people understand better, and get them to recognize like the bar is pretty high, but you can cross that bar.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's not above your head. Uh, you're limited only based on what you want to actually ingest as far as um, documentation, uh, content from creators,
Hmm.
tutorials and blogs, things like that.
No, you're so right, and I think that's the thing. I think I think maybe COVID has spurred a lot of this thing on. We've all been kind of locked away for the last couple of years, and back to your point around Microsoft there being that kind of company that has kind of developed platforms for businesses, and now they have this their own cloud platform. I think when COVID hit, you can tell by the exponential growth that the kind of Microsoft has seen across the Azure platform that it's a really cool place to be with a lot of cool tech. But at the same time, there's a lot of learnings, I think is probably safe to say. And certainly a lot of people I've been speaking to have kind of used this strange situation that we've kind of all been in over the last 18 months or 2 years to really empower themselves to go and learn more. And look, Jay, this is where I think cloud advocacy has kind of come into its own to kind of help, if nothing more, but act as a pointer or really delve deep into a certain topic area. Like you say, dependent on what a particular person is looking for, the kind of light touch, easy to read documentation, or a full on level 400 deep dive video on a particular technical subject. What's your take on cloud of advocacy now, Jay? Having worked in the space with Microsoft for a few years now, doing some great things with Azure. What's your take? It feels like we're coming out of COVID now. Have you got any kind of lessons learned over the last couple of years with how you've had to work?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I have. I think I used to be on the road a lot.
Mm.
I think in 2019, I did like 120 days on the road doing different events, going across the planet where I could to reach people. And
Hmm.
so you become a little complacent in the idea of, well, all I have to do to really accomplish what I need is to go to this place, do a talk for, an hour, and then meet with people after to find out, hey, what'd you think? What can I do to help you out? Interfacing
Hmm.
with users, and finding out what their needs are. And I guess it was like the last day of February of 2020, I got back.
Hmm.
I had spent like the week in Copenhagen and Geneva. And when I got home, and I realized I watched all these events that I had planned for March of 2020 start to just go
Yeah,
away.
sure.
And then into April and all this stuff. Like I had the year planned out until nearly August.
Hmm.
What what happened to me is I kind of freaked out because I was like, all right, well, how am I supposed to really reach people? How am I supposed to have these
Mm.
conversations? And I came to learn that, there's other ways to do advocacy without having to be in front of an audience
Hmm.
in person. And the ways that I've really learned is one, streaming. I do a lot of streaming, and I think that people doing streaming on platforms like YouTube and Twitch has really helped move the needle for people who want to do advocacy work.
Hmm.
It's made people capable of doing, like, on the fly interactive conversations that maybe people were less inclined to be a part of, because they said, well, I can just go to Microsoft Build the tour when it comes to the Excel Center, or when it comes to a place out in Copenhagen or
Yeah,
Stockholm. And so
I'm
that
with you. Yeah.
people just got kind of used to saying, well, they're coming to me at some point.
Hmm.
Now what we're doing is we're coming to you, but we're giving you the option of when you want to show up and how you want to take in that information. So if you want to watch a recorded version of a live show that I did on Thursday, you can. If
Hmm.
you want to be with us at like 10 in the morning here East Coast for AZ Update on Fridays, where Pierre and I kind of have that conversation about what new services are out there. You can be part of that live or catch it later on. So I think that uh, video has been really important. I actually had to learn how to become a video editor, a
Yeah.
video
Yeah.
producer, had to learn how to work with Adobe After Effects, lots and lots of, like, I'm a Mac user, so lots of
Okay.
ScreenFlow. Um, Went through the OBS process and tried to understand how that worked, and then kind of settled on StreamYard because it's just great service. I like the kind of turnkey solution that they provide
Sure
to be
thing.
able to do video streaming plus screen sharing plus having guests and being able to do overlays and things like that. To me, it's been really, really useful.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, isn't it? I think at the start when you talk about the things that you've had to learn, who'd have thought that, eh? Who'd have thought that at the beginning of lockdown, you'd be learning how to basically produce your own short films.
Hmm.
It's a cool thing in itself, I guess. But you're learning new skills, and I guess that opens up some different opportunities with how to learn. I mean, you mentioned a couple of the shows that you're actively involved with other Microsoft advocates at the moment. You mentioned AZ Updates. I know you do Azure Fun Bites as well, and you're on with April Edwards on the DevOps Lab show as well. I mean, how are you finding the uptake for those shows, Jay? And what do you enjoy most about doing those kinds of shows? Is it the audience participation? Is it the content creating and coming up with new and novel ideas with showing a demonstration? What what has changed for you, I guess, from having to travel to that location to stand on a stage as opposed to video content creation?
When I came up with Azure Fun Bites, I really wanted a way to be able to combine the idea of, like, snippets of information and conversational displays of how technology could be used. And I really
Mhm.
wanted to focus on the different people from Microsoft and other vendors uh, to learn about how they believe this technology works. So, for
Mhm.
instance, I last week had a guest from a vendor who wanted to talk about feature flags. And feature flags in themselves may not be the most exciting conversation to have, but how do you implement them? What
Mhm.
technologies can you use to best use those feature flags and for your CI and CD process? Things like that. How do you make sure testing is done? How do you track which, all that stuff to me was really super interesting. So to hear someone kind of talk about the technical specifications of how these things get rolled out, along with also having just a conversation. And I think that that's been one of the things that I've really enjoyed about how my work has changed is I love having conversations with people uh, and interacting with audiences and
Yeah.
making technology ingestible. And maybe that's why, it's called fun bites, because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can take a bite and feel like, all right, I had this nice little meal, and
Mm.
it's not going to upset my tummy because it's just right. And that's the way I look at it.
And I suppose it's great, that we've been able to reach out. Like I probably we wouldn't be having this conversation had it not been for the last 2 years. We may very well have met at some point in a conference hall somewhere across Europe or the US. But
Hmm.
I suppose it's been able to reach out to those people that have got really specific knowledge of, like you say, third party vendors, or very specific knowledge on how a Microsoft feature or functionality should work. And just being able to chat with somebody, that in my opinion and my experience, that helps to grow your experience in those areas as well. Just taking on board other people's views on it. So I mean, it's really cool. So I mean, in terms of advocacy, Jay, I mean, what is your typical target audience? Who are you looking for? And it's one of the things, like I've really followed a lot of the great advocates across Microsoft for years now, turning up at events. But I know, having spoken to colleagues and other people in industry, they don't necessarily know that this kind of role exists in the industry. I mean, what would you say to those people if they were watching this video? How would you explain that role of developer relations?
Sure. You know, no piece of software could ever be used if someone didn't actually tell someone else about it, whether it's through, marketing purposes, or practices, or people advocating on behalf of it. And so I always used to like to think, code in a repo that no one knows about is useless. So having to advocate on behalf of these things makes it so that people will actually use them and understand them. And I think that that's one of the things that you can explain first of like what advocacy is, and or developer relations, is getting people to understand exactly why this particular technology, this method of coding, whatever it is, this infrastructure deployment methodology works. And I believe in the idea of putting it into simple terms. There's a lot of people who spend time, doing deep code examples, things like that, and that's good. But I am not a JavaScript developer. I'm not a Go developer. That's not what I've been doing. I've been doing operations and infrastructure now for almost 20 years,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
so, or over 20 years at this point. And so being able to explain to people, like, you can utilize containers and you don't need to actually know the ins and outs of Kubernetes. There's a
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
You can virtualize your existing solution and add a hybrid aspect to it, and have management and monitoring. Just all that stuff it's not completely uh, a massive mountain to climb. There are ways that you can get started. There's tons and tons of documentation, and I think that that's really where you want people to eventually go. You want them to read your content or watch your content. But if you work at a place like Microsoft, you really want people to get driven to documentation,
Hmm.
or Microsoft Learn, because these are places that people can continue the conversation around what you've been showing them. So if they want to say, all right, hey, I watched this video today about how to set up GitHub Actions with Azure Kubernetes Service, you know, being able to say, I learned how to do this. Here's a doc on that for the rest of the team. Why don't you all take a look at this documentation that gives you an intro, or go to this Microsoft Learn module that gives you an intro tutorial, whatever. It's only going to help spread the knowledge that you want your developers or your uh, operations teams to understand, so that you can get the most out of what everyone's doing. So learning about how to communicate that stuff, how to get people to read the docs,
Yeah.
and to really understand how to start executing. That's all a huge part of doing advocacy.
No, it's a really good way of describing it. The example you used there to kind of, some code sat in a repo without nobody, or nobody knowing what it's there for. He's not doing anybody any favors. So, I mean, it's a really good way of explaining it. And I guess, again, relating it back to some of the features and functionality that has been in Azure in fairness, for probably a little while, but it's always been added to, it's always been developed, and it's been tweaked and changed, which is fantastic to see. It's always difficult for any one person to stay on top of the entire breadth of a platform like Azure. I think it's probably more than safe to say that there are, there's so many different disciplines where, if you like, those traditional roles coming into the cloud tech arena could fit in with one or two. And I think from what I'm seeing in with peers and colleagues alike, is there's this state of slight confusion, right? Which area should I delve into? Should I need this? Should I need that? I think you mentioned there, of course, about coming from the operations background. Similarly to myself, I felt the need to, like you, Jay, in years gone by, I've had, relatively okay-ish scripting level abilities. I've learned programming concepts, but I'm nowhere near that kind of seasoned developer type of person. That's not my background.
Mm-hmm.
But are you starting to see the shift with people? Actually, it's probably a good idea now to have some of those skills when you're working with cloud technologies for deployment purposes, or for, you mentioned things like, DevOps and DevOps pipeline, CI/CD. Are you seeing that that's the way that we should be going as operations folk, or do you see it differently? Is there still a place for everybody? What's your take on that whole arena, Jay?
There's definitely a place still for people who are doing things around IT operations that might not be traditional, infrastructure deployment for web applications or mobile applications. I think that we're in a place right now where being able to do things that can withstand the most amount of failure
Mm-hmm.
is one of the most important technical skills that you can really have right now. Is that you can think a lot about your success and how many nines are in your SLA, how much green is in your monitoring, things like that. But ultimately, you need to understand that if you do have failure that gets introduced into what you're building, whether it's an Active Directory that you're building out and maintaining with a user base in it, or you're building say large scale applications, it's understanding how they'll all withstand the worst case. And I think that if you start planning your technical skills about how to manage the worst case scenarios, you can better really live through those terrible moments. And if you're someone who says, well, I don't understand the concept of DevOps. Is it a technology? Is it a tool? Is it a what is it? And you can just say, well, you know what? It's left in the air right now. No one really knows the correct definition, but it's certainly a combination of all those things. So understanding automation, how to automate through failure, a tremendous skill set. Using things like auto scaling, load balancing, CDNs, understanding how all that can only benefit you is huge.
It is almost that, isn't it? It's almost like you've got to go through this moment of realization. There's lots of cool tools and technologies out there, but it's just trying to understand how they could best help you, I guess, as an IT pro in the particular industry that you're working in. So, I mean, you mentioned some of the cool. I keep using the word new, and although technologies have been around for a while, they're going to be new to somebody. So you mentioned containerization and Kubernetes, and certainly to an operations person, that may seem like some new fandangled technology that, do I need to learn, don't I? And I suppose it's absolutely got its roots in the operational camp, because it's about running applications in a highly available and robust manner. Yet it's done almost with a software developer's hat on. It's one of those technologies that kind of really does cross the boundaries. But look, I've seen some cool new announcements from Microsoft, especially in the Azure space, with actually being able to run certain services in containers across hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. It doesn't really matter. I mean, what's your take on that in terms of those services in Azure? I mean, what are your favorite Azure services? I guess, Jay.
One of the things that I really like that is a pretty recent offering, and you said this. There's so many different offerings. There's like 200 plus products that Azure provides. Um, Azure Container Apps, which is in preview, is a really great way for people to start building microservices and using something like a project like Dapper or uh, Kata for load balancing, or I should say scaling. Uh, all these things are making your life easier. It's also giving you a way to utilize containerizing and microservicing your solutions without necessarily having to understand all the bells and whistles behind Kubernetes. So not having to worry about the scheduler, not having to worry about the kube network, all that stuff. I think that that's big. And the idea that you can do things around like background processing or event-driven processing, using a messaging service and queuing, and having it all on demand when you need it. Tremendous. I love that
Mm.
service. It's still fairly new. And the other one that I really like that is essentially giving people the option to deploy in say an automated and DevOps way without having to have a ton of prior experience is Azure Static Web Apps,
Yeah.
which is a really great service. If you've got, say, like a Jamstack application, or maybe you're using a, a a static site generator that you like, either with ASP or it doesn't matter, that it supports so many different languages.
Mm.
The idea that you can say, here's a repository full of code, build it, deploy it, and then update it whenever I push a new change. I think that that's one of the best innovations that has really helped people be able to build more, do more, achieve more, because we're helping you using some scaffolding. We're giving
Hmm.
you ways to kind of build up what it is you want to see built without you having to know all the technical ins and outs of, like, how infrastructure is going to exist. I mean, that's another reason why serverless and using functions within Azure and durable functions has been really popular. People want to be able to make services happen without necessarily having to worry about, okay, what about backups? Who's setting those up? You can just, for the most part, for most services, click a checkbox and get a backup. Or
Yeah.
some Azure services don't even require you to click that checkbox. They're just constantly backing things up for you. And the same can be said in the database world. Using your own self-hosted database may be something that you understand. You might say, I can run Postgres, or I can run MongoDB on my own. But what happens when you really need to be able to scale those solutions? What happens when you need to add a number of different read replicas, or you need to make sure
Mm.
that you're not only that you have backups, that your backups work?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because we don't pay for backups, we pay for restores. So being able to kind of say, I'm going to take a lot of that um, operational overhead and pass it on to somebody else, I think has been one of the better reasons to consider some of these different types of services. And containers, you know, technology's moved in that direction around application deployment for a couple years now.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that people really appreciate is the lack of patch management, the lack of needing to understand all the different binaries that are a part of a solution. It's just been transformative.
It so has, and I think when I first started dabbling in the world of Docker and grabbing an image and trying to just get my head around that whole right, I can build an application into the image and I can run it locally, and look, it could be a web app. Just, finding your feet with containerization. That absolutely there is I would say there's a lowish barrier to entry in the fact that some of these things are relatively free for personal. Well, they're free Docker, free for personal use. I know they've introduced some kind of a licensing thing now if you're going to start using it for small business, but they're relatively low. It's just about you investing the time to use your grey matter to try and understand some of these things logically. And I guess one of the things that did it for me, or has recently done it for me, bringing off the point about the app services now that are in preview, is it was always about building an application into a container and then running that container somewhere. And not being a software developer, it was a case of, oh, right, okay, how do I do that? So I started looking at that, and that takes you off down this whole other rabbit hole of, well, do I need to be a software developer now? But the one thing that kind of made it real for me was around IoT Edge. So looking in terms of Azure IoT, the IoT Hub, but running edge devices, because they run containerized versions. And it kind of dawned on me, this reality where, I was putting a container on a very small, low-profile compute platform that was effectively an Azure storage account. And you can match that up to a storage account in Azure, so that if I'm saving an image or something into blob storage on that IoT Edge containered storage account, it can sync up to the cloud. And I thought, wow, that is powerful, and now all of a sudden I can have components of Azure running on an edge device, and they can talk to the thing that I know and love in Azure. So it just, for me, it was one of those moments of, actually, back to I think Satya Nadella, when he first said it a few years back now, about being able to empower everybody to achieve more. It's like, wow, Microsoft have really kind of ticked that box, and it's kind of exciting to see. But it's like I always say to people now, it's no longer about the technology and learning the technology. I think it's just a given. Look, if you work in tech and you want to be technical, you kind of just have to be cool with learning constantly. Every day is a school day. Be humble, drop your ego, because nobody knows everything. But then switch over to this creativity side. I mean, how have you coped with that view of, really thinking of the cool demos and the cool ways that you can kind of demonstrate the technology? What's your take on that? Have you found that easy? Have you found it a struggle?
Half and half. It's always about creating a story or a reason to do something. I did a talk, I think it was for Microsoft Ignite or Build, one or the other, a couple years ago. And it was all about the idea of interns adopting DevOps as part of like what their summer project is, and utilizing Azure services in order to do that. And so I actually had to come up with, like, this is a fake company that we use all the time, Tailwind Traders at in the Azure Cloud Advocacy team. So let's create this like made up team inside the company of interns who only have a certain number of like ready to go technical skills, but need to bring more on. So what I thought was interesting was kind of trying to create, this is a story, these are the people involved, this is the task that they've been given, and these are the ways that they can achieve their goals using Azure technology. And so I found that, if you put people just in front of a slide deck and keep hitting next, they're eventually going to get tuned out. They're not going to really care. They're going to eventually say, well, where's the demo? Do I have to wait another like 45 minutes to be able to actually see how this is accomplished? And so I believe in the idea of like, set up a narrative, but don't let the slideware take over the entire conversation. Have some things to show people. And so I like to be able to do like live streaming demos where we have a thing we want to actually accomplish. So I want to be able to configure a database to be able to handle a certain amount of connections over a certain period of time, and then scale down when it's no longer necessary. I would actually want to come up with a story on why that would be useful. Maybe I have a a car sharing application, and I need to be able to know where certain cars are at a certain time. And we know that, at say 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., they're going to be low on traffic. So we're not going to need as much infrastructure, being able to build out services around that. So actually explaining these are the situations in which we need this, and this is the situation in which we don't need this anymore.
Hmm.
I think, like I said, just kind of creates a story, helps people understand the reasons to implement certain technologies, and gives them something that's relatable to them.
And I think that's probably where I was going, because I think sometimes it's too easy to slip into that mold of, look, we've got cool new tech. This is how you use it, and that's great. But then there's also that, why would you want to use it? And yeah, you're so right, and that's a great way of building up that story. And I guess where I was coming from is, I'm like a kid in a sweet shop with tech. When there's cool new things, it's like, oh, I got to play with it, and then all of a sudden I think, well, how do you create a story? And my stories end up being so long and convoluted and go off into so many different directions. I think, oh my god, how are people ever going to understand this? So I guess it's taking that big picture, the end to end solution, and trying to break down each of those component parts and show how they can be kind of glued together. Um,
Making things digestible. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's the best way
yeah.
to think about it. You
Well,
take a
as your fun
bite.
bites.
Exactly. You take a bite, you make it ingestible, and you have people not, like I said, worry about a tummy ache because they're getting too much all at once. No, you want to
Yeah,
make sure that they're enjoying the meal, that they're taking the bites that they enjoy each bite that they take, rather than just saying, "Look, I'm gonna just open the trough and you eat what I have." That nobody wants to be force fed the same old thing. They want to be able to understand how these things work, but they want to do it in a way that feels real, that
yeah,
feels
yeah.
not like you're just being shoved marketing material, or you're just like listening to someone drone on about a subject and not necessarily give you real world use cases for it.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely, Jay. I think there's, I guess there's so many cool things you can do with technology today. It's just trying to find what actually, floats people's boats, so to speak. What would be cool to show in a demonstration, things like that. But Jay, it's been super fantastic having a catch up with you. It's brilliant. It's rather than, it's like my own interactive little chat session rather than watching you on one of the shows like AZ Updates or something like that. So it's been really cool. Look, before we close off this episode today, there's always one question I like to ask all my guests, which is this big open-ended thing of, look, why are we going down this road? What's your next big bets in technology, Jay? Where do you think we're headed with all of this?
Um, it's hard to say what the next big bet is because people keep throwing um, more strange ideas about what is going to change technology, and people are talking about Web3 and crypto. But I'm not necessarily sold on that. I think that um, there's a huge desire for things like VR and augmented reality being a part of like things like gaming systems. And
Sure. Yeah.
so all those things are going to create data that someone else is eventually going to want to use for things like advertising,
Mm.
marketing. And so I think data ingestion and sorting out how that data can be used has been a big problem that some companies have learned to work around. But I think that it's only going to get bigger when we add more platforms for people to use. So whether it's the quote unquote metaverse or these crypto transactions that people are like, there's going to be a need to be able to store, sort, and share all this data.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think people have been saying big data for years, but I still think that it's still a solid bet. The idea of databases and how they're used is just not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I can't help but agree. I think there's, the term data's the new gold sort of thing has been around, like you say, for a little while now. But you can see it, can't you? You can see that the amount of different metrics and data points that are being collected by companies now is phenomenal. So I like it. I like your style, and hopefully we'll see where we go with Web3. That'll be a cool thing as well, like you say, with AR and VR. So yeah, food for thought, AJ. So see how we get on.
Absolutely.
Jay, leaves me to say thanks for being such an awesome guest. Really have enjoyed having a chat with you for this last sort of 30, 40 minutes. Thanks so much for giving up your time and coming on and saying hello to me.
No problem, John. Thanks for having me. And remember, everybody, Azure Fun Bites, Thursdays on Learn TV, aka.ms/LearnTV, 2 p.m. East, 11 a.m. on the West. And I believe we're 7 p.m. in the UK. So
I'll stick the links below.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Take care, John.
No, anytime. Thanks a lot, Jay. I'll catch you soon.
You will.
Ta-da for now.